I guess this is the welcome to the podcast kind of moment. But so we've got Tracy Furr and Rich Bono from to talk about percussion repair. So I guess I just wanted to start by first of all, just thanking both of you have been immensely helpful on the Percussion Solutions page. And Rich, we met out of this very necessity. What we were I think the very first time you came out to Prosper High School, we were hosting the Region Band Festival. And I wanted to make sure our timpani were dialed in, and so you came out and helped us with that. And obviously, have a reputation for being the timpani go-to guy. And then later found out oh no, Rich does everything. Mm-hmm. So, he just actually came out and helped us with our diagnose the chime issue.
Yes, we did.
we found I couldn't figure out why one note on the chimes wasn't resonating, and it was the tube was actually bent. So I never would have occurred to me. So
the first and only time I've ever seen that.
Yeah, right. So anyway, so put out the call to Yamaha to get another one.
Mm-hmm.
And then Tracy, we met at UMEA. I did a clinic out there, and you had a booth, and was thunderstruck by how beautiful some of the gear, the repairs, and that all of that is. And so kind of been trying to champion you to other people, and hyping it on the social media and that sort of thing, because it's beautiful, artisan work. It's not just, you're not just doing repairs, you're doing it's very artful stuff. Yeah. My uncle builds cabinets and that sort of thing, and this isn't track home type building cabinets. We're talking about custom homes, and I feel like that's you go from being a craftsman to being an artisan, and I think that your stuff is amazing. So I'm glad that you both are willing to be here. But I guess Tracy, just starting with you, what got you into this part of it, and how did this become something that you kind of turned into a business and that sort of thing? How'd you come into it?
So what really got into it is my dad owns a machine shop. So I started working there very young age, every day after school, basically growing up. And then, during high school and stuff, I eventually joined marching band and the band program, percussion ensemble, everything. So by the end of high school, it's okay, I want my own marimba. So why in the world would I buy one when I have everything I possibly need to build one? So I built my first one. It's still hanging around somewhere in a dark corner where I don't want to think about it. But after that first one, I was I could do better. Built my second one. Someone else asked, hey, can you build me one? I think at this point, there are 16 full 5-octave marimbas out floating around the U.S. somewhere at this point. But after that was the first couple of years, I was just building marimbas. But then it started turning to see this, can you tune my marimba at the school? And then the repair things kind of started coming in, and then it's I want a nice glockenspiel. I'll buy this piece of crap one, restore it, and then people ask me, can you restore these things? So it's kind of I pick something up, learn how to do it, and then I offer it as a service. And now at this, I stopped building marimbas 4 years ago. It's way too hard. But yeah, at this point, I've got pretty much done almost everything that any percussionist might ever need, and I also do a lot of random stuff in between. So
that's cool.
That's how it started, and now I'm at this point where I just can't stop.
Yeah. Well, it's the mother of invention is just the necessity of getting something fixed, and there's nobody else to do this, so I guess we'll do it. That's actually how I started writing music. We had we had store-bought arrangements when I was in high school, Hal Leonard or whatever, and we just started editing the drum parts to make them cooler, more drum corps style stuff, and it's nobody else is doing it, and then people are hey, well, will you rewrite our parts? And then so it's funny how that that snowballs into an obsession. But that's cool that you say that, because I again, I have my stepdad and his brother are both very into woodworking. I'm terrible at machine work or anything, but woodwork, the smell of like freshly cut wood and all those things. So like, I don't know, that's something cool about starting with nothing or just a bunch of boards.
I can tell you, rosewood smells really good when you freshly cut it.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, that's amazing. So, Rich, how did this become, Bono Percussion? And
Yeah, absolutely. I was a full-time band director in Texas for 4 years. And while I was teaching, I noticed that I never had time to tune my drums or even fix anything because we were just so busy, as I'm sure a lot of people on this channel are. And I was also trying to be a freelance musician at the same time and, do gigs. And so after I had left teaching, I wanted to focus a little more on repairs because I noticed that there was an emptiness in the market for that. It was a service. I went around and talked to like all the percussion directors that I knew in the area and said, if I came out and fixed your drums, would you pay for that? And they were like, absolutely, hands down, I would pay for that because I have no time to do that. So I started out just by doing timpani work, changing timpani heads. Any pedals aren't working correctly. Kind of became known as the timpani guy in the North Texas area, which was kind of cool. I like that title. But then noticed that there was more need for more repairs. And so then I started venturing out into snare drums and auxiliary equipment and all that kind of stuff. And the great part about it is basically when I started, I really kind of knew nothing about it, but I knew that there was this emptiness in the market for it, and it was needed by band directors. So I was really trying to help band directors out, and that's really been our focus of our business. And then since then, we've kind of grown, and we've got basically two prongs to our business. We've got the repair side, which is, we go out to schools, we'll do churches as well, or individuals will bring stuff to us. Or if it's a bigger project, we'll bring it back to us and then work on it at wherever we're working. And then we service the North Texas area right now and North Carolina, where we're servicing. We've got a worker in North Texas working for us, and then somebody in Charlotte working for us as well. And they do fantastic work. So we try to handle as much as we can on location. And then the second prong of our business, actually, we're starting out on this adventure, is the education side, where we realize that, of course, we can do all of this work, but there's a lot of this stuff that the band directors themselves can do. And I feel like there's a lot of people who want to handle these things on their own because they're quick fixes. And so we're trying to get the word out of how to do these quick fixes, and stuff like this podcast is great for that. We actually go out and do in-service days for directors for a school district or counties. And so we take 2 or 3 hours and we just put all the band directors from the county together, and we just talk about what you should do with your timpani. How do you tune your snare drum? How do you adjust the snares, and all easy stuff that you can do. And we've started out a YouTube channel where we're starting to show all this stuff. So it's easy access 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for whatever you need. And then we even do clinics with students where we teach them how to change a drum head, how to tune their drums. A lot of students have drum sets. So we teach them the different ways to tune their drum sets for different styles and stuff like that. So we're really trying to focus on our motto, which is really, we're here to help fix your drums. So whether that means we can fix it for you or we can help you fix it, that's really kind of what our goal is with repairs.
Yeah, the teach the man to fish, kind of idea that, and it's funny because I think that's the Percussion Solutions page also,
Yes.
in the back of my mind, that if, we can all run around the country and try and do clinics and even my clients that I all over the United States, but I fly in and I work with a group for 2 or 3 days, maybe. The 2 or 3 days isn't much of an impact. Whereas if you teach the educators, if we just heighten the level of education a little bit for everybody, it makes them so much happier as a director, and the kids have a great experience. Like that's, as cliche as the word win-win is, but that is it. Like we're really trying to just make it so that the community is armed with enough percussion information,
because there's not really a lot of it out there right now, and there's a big void for for that kind of information.
Yeah, 1,000%. Yeah, which I guess it's a great way to kind of start the conversation about repairs and that sort of thing. So, I guess my first question is like, what do you guys see what is the most common phone call? Well, Rich, I know that you started doing timpani, so is that what you get called for the most? I'm just curious what the two of you, what do you get called the most for?
Yeah, absolutely. Timpani is still my number one call. My pedal isn't staying. What else is on there? Which way do I turn this knob? Should I touch this knob? My snare drum is rattling too much. It rings all the time. Those are kind of the questions we get quite often.
Yeah.
I'll get phone calls from people on gigs. Like, I just rolled into this gig and I'm playing on the church's timpani and I can't figure out why it's not working. Can you help me right now?
Yeah.
That was a lot.
Yeah.
I'm exactly the same. I was this morning I went and rotated a drum for someone because it was out of revolutions and it was rotated backwards 180 degrees. It's like, the gauge is on the wrong side. It doesn't make any sense. And just, timpani is definitely the biggest thing I go out to for repair work, because there's just so many things that can go wrong with them. People just don't know what to do with it.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I researched all of this, and we'll kind of bring them up as we go. But it's interesting that the timpani is by far the thing that gets asked the most on the Percussion Solutions page. The next most common thing is actually how to adjust a harness. You'd be surprised how many and it's puzzling because I don't know why manufacturers, like every manufacturer, Yamaha, Pearl, Dynasty, Ludwig, Tama, Mapex. I don't know why each one of them should have a YouTube channel, and they should absolutely be doing a step-by-step on how every part of it works. I'm old enough that I remember having a vest carrier, which was just, one size fits all, and you can only adjust the height. Now there's so many mechanisms that move that people get. I think it's almost, there's too many adjustments available. So the kids end up messing them up and they rattle loose on the truck and that sort of thing. So, but it's interesting that, and then a lot of tuning questions, just a lot of, how do you tune a concert snare drum or drum set and those sorts of things. Hardware, like the bottom of the stand, it's slipped off the center pipe and that sort of thing. And I think most people don't know that there's an Allen wrench that they can use for that. And, adjusting springs on pedals and hi-hats and that sort of thing. So it's interesting to see. I scrolled back through before we met, but I'll kind of bring this up as we go. But I guess before we get into the weeds on the super intricate things, and by the way, just so that everybody knows who's listening to this, we're not, there's no possible way to go over everything. This is just going to be kind of a general overview and some things to think about, and then hopefully we can maybe do some follow-ups on more specific things. We could talk about timpani, just a pedal, or clearing drum heads for an entire episode. So just to let everybody know. But what, I guess my first question, and maybe the thing that's most helpful, is what can band directors, what can they learn to do for themselves? What's reasonable for a band director to educate themselves and go, I'm comfortable doing, these sorts of things, and what are some of the necessary tools and that sort of thing in order to accomplish those tasks? Tracy, I mean, what do you think about, what are things that you've seen band directors able to accomplish, or that you think with a little bit of instruction they could learn to accomplish?
So, I mean, I'll let Rich talk about the timpani stuff, but outside of timpani, restringing the bars on your mallet instrument, it's not that hard. On our Facebook page, we're constantly posting links about where to find the paracord and stuff, and it takes really no tools at all, except for maybe a little file to knock off some sharp edges on what's cutting the cord. But something like that, it's easy to do. Just even simple stuff like cleaning the instruments. That really helps keep them not only maintained but looking good, because an instrument looks good, the kids are going to respect it more and play a lot better on it when they see something nice and shiny. And so reaching out instruments, I mean, just, well, I'm sure we'll talk about it later, but just like the hardware and the frames in general, just having a little bit of a toolbox set up, socket set, standard wrenches and stuff. We'll go over that later, but just having all that, and then just a bunch of spare parts, the common spare parts on hand in a little toolbox. It's always ready to go. If something goes wrong, you can quickly identify it, grab a spare part, be done in 5 minutes, kind of thing.
Cool, Rich.
There's a lot of stuff that if you have the time, if you can just sit and look at it and think about how it might work, you can probably fix it on your own. There's some repair jobs where we go out and, it's the first time we've seen it and we've got to sit down and do the same thing, but a lot of times with timpani, making sure that the drum is in the right range fixes so many problems. If your head is in the right range, it fixes most of your pedal issues that you're going to have. So knowing which model drum you have and what the tuning range is for that drum goes a long ways. And then also seeing the range of that head. I can't tell you how many times I've gone in and they're saying stuff isn't working. We've tried adjusting stuff. And then I check the head itself and it's reaching 1.5 octaves. And it's like, okay, well, this head is clearly stretched beyond what it can hold anymore. That needs to come off. So being able to recognize the range and how stretched that head is. And then the pedal issues, if we have I'm sure we're going to go into this today. Each drum has its own little idiosyncrasy where this knob gets turned here, this knob gets turned here, and then on a different model, it's backwards, and it's over here on this side. So just knowing what your drum is and how to adjust that drum is actually pretty simple to do. So really just tuning and how to adjust your pedal are the two main things that most band directors can end up doing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly not an expert in, by any stretch of the imagination, but the things that I end up doing the most is just I have my little garage drawers, and I'm really mindful about keeping extra wing nuts, extra felts, marimba string. I always have I buy black surgical tubing so that I can replace the bushings. My marimbas are real careless when they pull their stick bags off the marimba. The bushings, the black bushing that surrounds the little post pops off. So we're constantly replacing those. And so I bought like 10 feet of black surgical tubing. So you just snip off a little bit and slide it on, things like that. We'll talk about preventative measures as well, but Wingnut Wednesday is maybe one of the, just that alone might be one of the best. There's nothing more frustrating than having a vibraphone that's missing a wingnut. And so, an instrument that, can cost $7,000 is not working properly because, there's not a wingnut.
And we see a lot too of, somebody's like, my keyboard frame wobbles. And I can't figure out why it wobbles. And then I just go up and I tighten first thing I do is tighten all the wing nuts and just check that. And a lot of times that fixes many of the issues.
Yeah. So I think and I think the other part is like, when and where to replace heads, just to have a schedule, because I know that budgets are limited. But I think that most people acknowledge that, like, you have to, especially things like Barry saxes, right? Like, bass clarinets and that sort of thing, like they have to get fixed every year. You send them in at the end of the school year, every summer they go to the shop and they do the repairs and they bring them back, right? And so that's kind of a normal thing that we plan on as band directors, and it feels like there's not really a plan in place for percussion. And if we simply go like, look, I have a super limited budget, so I can't replace all these heads every single year, but what is for my budget, what is a reasonable amount of time that I can go without changing timpani head or concert bass drum head? But the idea that, like, walking into, and I realize marching heads, are made of Kevlar, but I've seen groups that have had drums for darn near a decade, and they have the original heads, like as they came on the drum. And so things like that.
If you want to go into this a little bit, we've started working with some school districts and giving them a set plan of what fits within their budget, and then we'll actually send out a quote for them for the year, so then they can send that to their administrators and say, this is what it's going to take for us to repair our percussion, or at least just keep it moving year after year after year.
Yeah.
And then they allow a bit of a budget for like emergency repairs. So really a lot of the stuff that we see between Texas and North Carolina, with if you have a little bit healthier budget, you should change the heads more often. Really, if it's an instrument that's being used every day by multiple class periods, those heads need to be changed every year, if not every half of year. Like your snare drums, snare drum heads for sure. Timpani heads, again, that's the same concept, but it's a lot more expensive to change those heads nowadays. Prices just keep going up and keep going up. Even between Evans and Remo, you're somewhere between the $400 to $700 just to buy the heads themselves. So it is quite an investment to change those heads out. So in general, for those, if you can get to them every 2 to 3 years, great. But I normally tell people 5 years max. And you got to kind of think of it as just a big investment, because it is such a big sound in your band, and it does make a big difference. I get plenty of directors that have been using, like you said, they bought the drums 15, 20 years ago. They're like, oh, okay, I guess we should do this. And then we change their head and they go, oh my gosh, that's what they sound like. And it was literally just putting a new head on, changed it completely. As far as bass drum heads, it's kind of the same schedule. They don't get used quite as heavily. So generally we normally recommend around the 4 to 5 year range for that. If you need to stretch it more, as long as it's not getting beat up significantly, you're normally in pretty good shape. So the big things are your snare drum, you want to change out yearly. If you can do it twice a year, even better.
Drum set, if you have a jazz band that's active, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And then your timpani every 3 to 5 years. And then your concert bass drum 5, if you can stretch it a little bit longer if you need to. But those are normally my general recommendations, depending on your budget.
That's great. That at least gives somebody a framework of a plan, and I think that's great. Other things that came to mind were like, rewrapping. We get a lot of questions about like rewrapping concert bass drum mallets, and or maybe even marimba mallets and that sort of thing. Changing tambourine heads, which is actually can be difficult if you've never done it before. It's just because it's
intimidating.
It's a slippery process. You got to take the head off of a concert tambourine that's expensive, and to rehead that. So I guess the follow-up to that would be like, what are some things that you should probably leave to the professionals? Like what are some things that if you have the ability to have maybe a college professor or a local pro come and maybe do some work. I know that I'm sorry. We used to have like Dr. Bruff come in, actually do a timpani clinic with the kids, and then change the head. So we actually got try and get kind of a 2-for-1 deal with our local college professor. So what are your suggestions on that, Tracy? And do you have thoughts on that? What do you think?
So I mean, if you want to like take the time to learn how to change like timpani heads, you can do it. There are resources out there that you can learn how to properly do it. But that timpani is like what is one of the hardest ones to learn how to do. So if you don't really have the time to properly do it, then that's where you bring in a professional to do it. Like the snare drums, the drum sets, they can easily be done. Those are a lot easier to learn. So you don't really need to hire someone to come in to do those. But like, even same with like, conga heads, bongo heads, they just a little bit of research, you can do those by themselves. It's when especially with like timpani changing heads, when the heads are not the only problem. It's like, oh, I have, the pedal, even with the new head, is still slipping around, having mechanical issues on top of the head issues. And it's those type of situations where if it's taking you a long time to figure out, or you're not really good with using your hands necessarily, that's where you need to start considering hiring someone to come and do that. Because you can't, if you're good with like figuring things out and working on stuff, there are resources. But if you have a hard time kind of doing that, you could end up making things worse in the long run.
Yeah, we had a well-intentioned band parent that they had a snare drum that had like the aluminum casing, like a concert snare drum that has like the aluminum casing that marching snare drums have, and it had snapped. And a well-to-do band parent welded it all back together. And if they just would have called us, we could have sent them the right parts, and then it would have just been unscrew and screw back in. And instead, it ended up being like $400 repair instead of a $120 repair. It was, I felt bad. But some of the other stuff that I was thinking of, the bigger stuff that you want to send are professional. Like if you have the Ludwig timpanis and you get that little heel slap at the bottom where you try to push it up, but it keeps slapping down to the bottom, that's something you want to call somebody to come out and handle for you. If you've got cracked chime tubes, send them to Tracy. He does great work on that kind of stuff. He's very well versed in that kind of stuff. Anything that you hear that goes snap probably is not something you want to handle, or anything that's stuck you don't really want to handle. Trying to think of any other things that I've run across. Oh, if you like repainting your synthetic bars, that kind of stuff, that takes a good amount of equipment and a good amount of know-how to do. So that kind of stuff I would stick away from and definitely call somebody.
Yeah. We've seen the band director, the band parent sort of the Tim the Toolman Taylor. Maybe that ages me. It's an old sitcom, but just the idea of like over engineering things, that's a very band parent thing to do, and
they're very well intentioned, but give any of us a call first and we'll gladly help you out. And then something a band parent can do, we will definitely tell you that a band parent can handle that.
And I think that it never hurts to even just hit the Percussion Solutions page, like, hey, this is damaged, this is what we were thinking, let's just kind of maybe do a quick double check. But okay, so the most common thing, and we can get into the weeds, and we probably talk about this for the entire time, but like the most common question is, the comment is always, my pedal is broke.
Yep.
On Timpani. So Rich, you already talked about like the ranges, and can we talk like just so that people understand what we're talking about? So the range of each drum, and what the words balanced action means, and how that all relates. Can you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm gonna screen share here.
Okay,
so
great.
See what's going on. So this is from let me make sure I get it to share. This is from a book that I helped write, and it's really for band directors who aren't percussionists and how to help them teach percussion in general. But in the back of it, it's got this maintenance section, and this is the timpani part of it. And so this is a balanced action pedal, and what that means is there is a spring in here, and it is balancing out the tension of this head. So this head is pulling down, and this is counterbalancing that. And really what you're doing is balancing the head to the pedal. And the first thing that you're going to do to help with that is to do the ranges of the drum. And here is, if you have Ludwig timpani, these are your standard ranges that are recommended by Ludwig. So on your 32-inch, your bottom pitch is going to be a D. So that's the heel is all the way down to the ground. And the top pitch is going to be a B, and that's the toe down. Some drums on these Ludwigs will only reach a fifth, so you'll get D to A. But in general, once that head stretches out and relaxes, it should reach a B. And then E to C on your 29, A to F on your 26, D to B on your 23, and then F to D on your 20-inch. On these Ludwigs, you want to set the bottom pitch. That's the way the balancing on this one works. Now, if you have down here, if you have Yamaha drums, They also recommend setting the bottom pitch to these. And so this is your 32. Your bottom pitch is D. Your 29, your bottom pitch is an F. Your 26 is an A. Your 23 is a C. And your 20 is an E. So again, you're going to set the bottom of that. And actually, I'm going to be honest here. Sometimes when the heads are super stretched, I actually set the top pitches on this drum because I find that that extra range at the bottom isn't really that significant, but tightening that head too far really chokes off the sound of the drums. So if I find that the heads are super stretched, I actually set from the top pitch on these.
So if the pedal is moving, right, and it's not staying put, which most band directors are asking, that is caused because the drum is not within that tuning range. And generally speaking, if they've been played quite a bit and if they've been played aggressively, that head is stretched out and the bottom note is too low. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. Or it could be, you had a humidity change. You were outside with marching band and it was a really humid day. If you get a lot of moisture in that head, the fibers in there relax, which drops the pitch. And then, your pedals aren't staying. So you've got to adjust the drums that way.
So the spring and the balance aspect of it, the tension on the head has to balance with the spring tension, and that will keep the pedal from slipping. Correct. If that goes out of balance, so if the head is either too loose, or I guess it could be too tight in some cases, if that's not balanced, and that's when that pedal will move. So the first go-to on a repair is to get that in the correct ranges.
Yep. And then there's one more set here, the Adams drums. If you have an Adams set of drums, I'm getting to them. Sorry. Here, these are set from the top pitches. Okay. So your 32 is a B, your 29 is a D, your 26 is an F, your 23 is an A, and your 20 is a C.
Cool.
And then, did you want to get into pedal on this?
Yeah, I think so. I think that this is the one that everybody
talks about.
Yeah, that everybody talks about. So let's go ahead and we talk a little bit about the pedal.
So here on the Adams timpani, since we're here, once your head is in the range, the Adams are pretty good at staying with the pedal staying. We normally don't have too many issues with them, but if you do have an issue with it staying, the first thing you're going to check is to put this toe down and to see if it stays in that position. And if it does not, like if you push it all the way to toe down and it starts to slip back towards heel position, you need to adjust this adjustment knob. Now, this is the Gen 1 series. So the Gen 1 series has this little knob right here on the side, and it actually works backwards from what you think. You actually turn this one counterclockwise to, quote, tighten it. You're not actually tightening it, but you're going to turn this counterclockwise until that toe stays down. And generally speaking, that's all you need to do for that one. There is no, quote, brake adjustment on this or a PAC adjustment on this. This is the Gen 2 model. So the Gen 2 model looks more like Ludwig's with the knob here. And this one works like you would think. If you turn to the right, it'll tighten. So same thing here. You toe down to the base, and then you turn this until it stays. If you have issues with that afterwards, I'd go back and check your head and make sure it's in the right range. And if you're still having issues, I'd check to see if that head is just stretched too far. If you're getting that octave and a half on that head, it's probably not going to work. So that's with any drum. Yep. So that's the Adams timpani there. I'm going to do the Ludwigs real quick because they're pretty similar, and then I'll get to the Yamahas here. So the Ludwigs, you can see this is the spring tension knob here. And then on the side, they have what's called a brake adjustment. So the first thing you're going to do again is make sure the head's in range, make sure it's not stretched too far. And then the same process that we just talked about. You're going to push this toe down to the base, and then you're going to turn this knob until it stays. And the way I like to do this is if you're flexible enough, you can put your foot on this and hold it, or you can hold it down with your hand, and that'll make this knob really easy to turn. And then once you start to feel it kind of catch, that's when you know you're about in the right spot. You don't want to over tighten that. You just want to get it to the point where the toe will stay in this down position. And then once you do that, You take this heel and push it to the ground. And if it stays, you're good. No more other work is needed with that. If it starts to creep towards the toe down position, what you're going to do is take just a regular drum key. And this is actually the wrong side. It's actually on the other side here. There's 2 brake pads, and you're going to tighten that down. And I'll show you those brake pads. These are what the brake pads look like from underneath. So there's a drum key fitting right here. So you slide the drum key on the side, and then you tighten it. And all that does is push these 2 pads together, which pushes in on this horizontal pull rod and just basically stiffens up the action on the pedal. So if you like a pedal that is a little bit harder to push, you tighten that. If you like a pedal that's a little more loose, you open it. But if you have a pedal that is not staying in that heel down position after you've tightened the spring tension knob, then this is what you adjust. And that takes care of both of those issues with that. And then the Yamahas, they're a little bit different. Oh, here we go. That's the brake adjustment right there. You can see it's on this side. It's normally under, if you've got the professional gauges, it's under that professional gauge side. So it's on the right-hand side. And then the Yamahas are, so they have a couple different models here. The earlier series, the 6100 series, these are horrible pictures because when we did this book, I only had the pictures from my phone, and it was quarantined, so I couldn't go out and take pictures from but with a good camera. So on this drum, that spring tension knob that you would have on the Ludwigs, that big turning knob, is actually underneath this pedal. So you have to push this pedal to the toe down position, and this uses a timpani key to tighten that. So it's the same process. You would clear the head, or not clear the head, sorry, put the head in range, make sure to check it's not too loose, and then you push it to the toe down position. If it doesn't stay in the toe down position, you tighten this bolt right here, okay? And then on these Yamahas, they're pretty good with this. This is a really nice setup. That normally fixes the issue. You normally don't have to touch, they call this, what do they call that? A pedal adjustment clutch is what they call this. They call it PAC. This is really just how stiff or how loose you like your pedal action. You normally don't need to use this to help keep the pedal in place. That's normally just this. Oh, that reminds me. If you have a pedal that's staying down, but is wait, I think. If it's staying down, but it's having trouble coming back, I think is what it is, then you loosen this knob. But yeah, so then if you want a little bit more stiffness in your pedal, this is what you adjust. And it's the same on the 6200 series. The main adjustment is under the pedal, and most people don't even know that that's there. And the same for the 6300, and I think the newer models are the same as well. But this side pedal adjustment clutch is actually now a knob on the top. So if you want to change the action, oh, sorry, yes. So if you want to change the action of this, you have to loosen this lock nut here and then tighten or loosen. And then on this 6200 series, this adjustment, the PAC adjustment, is right here, right there. So they've got a bunch of different models, and they've tried some new stuff throughout the years. And but you just have to be aware of which model you have and where those adjustments are. And I think that pretty much covers the pedal adjustments there. So stop sharing.
That'll be super beneficial to a lot of folks. I think the I guess a warning, and you know, I think everybody can attest to this, purchasing a timpani head, and also I would say like any ethnic percussion head, if you're not sure what head to buy, call ahead. Don't just go to the website and start clicking. Actually pick up a phone and actually call you know, whether, you know, whatever your local retailer is, people, but the people that are knowledgeable on the subject, like Steve Weiss Music, Percussion Source, Chops Percussion, Columbus Pro Percussion, at all those sort of drum shops that are kind of industry leaders. They will know exactly. If you tell them what make, model, brand of timpani you have, then they will let you know exactly what size, because you can order the wrong size. And unfortunately, the same thing is true of a lot of hand drums, bongos and congas, even LP. I have an old set of LP classics, and I bought a head And I was like, oh, I've got LP Classics. I know what I'm doing. And I ordered ahead, and it actually doesn't fit the new rim. So they actually sent me a newer model that didn't fit. So as arrogant as I was, like, oh, I know what I'm doing. I've been doing this for years. I ordered the wrong head. So
Yeah, I've gotten so fed up with it that I've started making them myself. So I just bring the drum to me and I put the head on. But real quick on your timpani heads. So most schools are going to have a set of Adams or a set of Yamaha or a set of Ludwig drums. If you have a set of Adams or a set of Yamaha drums, you're going to have extended size collared drums. And so your head sizes are going to be 34-inch, 31-inch, 28-inch, 25-inch, and 22-inch. So all of those are 2 inches over your drum size. And then if you have a Ludwig, more than likely, unless you have a super old Ludwig, you're going to still have extended collars. I think it's 1978 is when they switched over to the extended collar size. And this is confusing too, because standard collar size is 1 inch larger than the bowl, and the extended collar size is 2 inches larger. But nowadays, the standard is the extended size. So it's really confusing. But just know, unless you have super old Ludwig drums, and it's going to be those standard sizes of 34, 31, 28, 25, 22. And the best way to check to see if you have that is on the bowl. You'll have the bowl, and then the counter hoop or the rim that goes around it. You'll have an inch spacing between that bearing edge and the rim, and that's your extended collar. If you have a counter hoop or rim that's really close to that bearing edge, more than likely that is a standard collar size. And so for that, you take your bowl size and you add 1 inch to it, and that gets you your head size. The only other opposite side of that is I've seen a couple drums. I've seen Ludwigs. I just did a set of Ludwigs like this, and I can't remember if Majestic has some of these too, where it's actually a what was it? The bowl measured like 32.5 inches, but it used the 34 head. And so it looks like a standard collar, but it was extended collar size. So really, just in general, if I'm ever questioning it, honestly, what I do is I take a tape measure and I put it on one side of the rim, and I go all the way to the other side of the rim, and I see what sizes that is. And if I see that 34 will fit on that, then it's a 34-inch head. Yeah. But those are the standard ways that we talk about how to measure your heads. But in general, if you just measure from one side of the counter hoop to the other side of the counter hoop, and if it fits that, that's going to be the right head for you.
Cool. So Tracy, I see you doing a lot of repairs, doing things like chime pedal mechanisms, vibraphone pedal mechanisms, that sort of thing. Tuning snare drums and that sort of stuff. So what are some things that you're seeing? And I think one of the other big questions that maybe you can help us with is casters. That comes up a lot. So the wheels are damaged, or they're, the brake is stripped out, and on the Yamahas, the little brake clip snaps off, and the Adams, the rubber wheels, they get torn up if the kids are pushing them across the asphalt and that sort of thing. So what are some things that you're seeing and things that you can help us with? Maybe starting with the casters and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So yeah, with the casters, we mainly talk about like Adams casters. The problem with Adams casters is they use what they call medical grade casters. So they're like these nice thick rubber, supposed to be super soft gliding casters that help absorb vibrations and keep your instrument from vibrating and falling apart. It doesn't help. Make sure you check all your nuts all the time. What do you call it? Wing Nut Wednesday. always tighten up your screws. But the problem with replacing Adams casters is this medical grade stuff is really hard to find perfect replacements for. Since they're based out in the Netherlands, they use a metric system for all their threads and stuff. It's just really difficult to find replacements. Like you can't go to Home Depot and find a caster that will fit on an Adams instrument. That just does not happen. Even online, it is. I've looked around. There are a couple things here and there. I think we posted on the Facebook page for like the field frame wheels that you can use as replacements, but it is just really hard to find actual replacements for Adams. Luckily, they're, you know, fairly new to the game. You know, some of the older like Voyager frame stuff are starting to fall apart. But those wheels, it's just, you know, the bearing side of stuff, it's all in metric, so it's hard to find replacements locally. So that if you're trying to replace Adams stuff, I would call, you know, Steve Weiss, Percussion Source, or call your local repair guy and ask, hey, where or who do I need to talk to find a replacement for this make model instrument? Because it's very specific for each instrument, and if you don't get the right size, the bearing wobbles, it's just going to make things worse. Especially on probably a lot of you see on the Adams Endurance field frames, you know, the casters. I should have got a picture of it, but you know, your caster is fine, but it's kind of tilting at an angle because there's a little socket head screw underneath that's starting to work loose, and it kind of is tilted a little bit. I think it's you have to take the wheel off and get a 10 millimeter hex wrench up in there, just tighten the screw, and that will most of the time fix the problem, keep it straight. If you know, simple maintenance like that will help keep the ball bearings from not breaking apart and your whole wheel collapsing. Those things are, I think, $100 a wheel to replace right now. So just a quick little, you know, take the wheel off. Yeah, you know, like I said, big old 10 millimeter hex wrench, tighten it up. That helps a lot on those field frames. The concert Voyager frames and stuff, they have the tiny little 3-inch wheels. You know, they have a nut you can go in and tighten as well. But a lot of times they're old, you know, 10, 15 years old at this point. You need to start looking at getting them replaced. And like I said, you can contact Percussion Repair or Steve Weiss to get replacements for that. So then moving to Yamaha, you know, it's kind of the same thing. They don't have medical grade necessarily, but a lot of the, you know, field frames, they have their tough terrain ones, they have the pneumatic wheels, they, you know, go flat, and they're pain to deal with and stuff. You can get, if you're careful and like make sure you measure things correctly, there are replacements in the US you can get. You can get like the flat free versions and stuff for those tough terrain frames. On all their other stuff, most of it is a threaded stem, which ends up being like a 12 millimeter stem. So again, it's hard to find local replacements. Nothing you're going to find at Harbor Freight or, you know, Home Depot is going to fit that. So again, you got to either order it from Yamaha. There is, you know, a Yamaha dealer in the US. They kind of, most of the time they have parts for that kind of stuff. They can usually get pretty quickly, but there are options available to replace those. But again, you got to have like the right size of wrench and stuff. So it's really worth asking people like, hey, can you either come replace this, or what do I need to replace this? Because you need like the thin wrench and stuff. So you just got to be careful when you're replacing these, making sure you get something that actually fits, and not just asking, like we talked about, your band dad to come in and drive a 1/2-inch bolt into a 12 millimeter thread and just kind of completely destroy and strip out the whole thing in the process. So that, you know, Yamaha, Adams, that's kind of where you need to work with those. The US-based stuff like Ludwig Musser, there's easily plenty of stuff available to replace those. And I'm sure a lot of people that have Musser mallet instruments are sick and tired of the wheels falling off the frame, because that's what everybody's dealing with. Let me see if I can pull this up. Where to go? So a lot of the Musser, all the stuff from the 90s and 80s, they have what they call the expandable caster. Share this. So it has this, you know, nut on the top with the rubber, the bushing going over this threaded stem that sticks up inside the legs on the xylophones, vibraphones, everything you come across. And over time, the rubber, you know, starts wearing down. It'll start cracking just from age. And every time, you know, you lift up your xylophone to get over a curb, the wheels just come flying off, and you have to stick them back in. It just becomes a pain. But there are places where you can buy either the whole replacement caster, you can buy replacement bushing. This Apollo casters is where I get a lot of actually where I get all my casters from. But something that I have a lot of the time when I have this issue, what I end up telling people is to get this. Here we go. So this is so on those casters for the muster instruments, it's a 1/2-inch thread which holds all those rubber sleeves and stuff that stick up inside the leg. This is a 1/2-inch square nut that fits on top of that instead of that round nut, and this square nut perfectly fits inside the square tubing on those legs on the muster instruments. So if you get a couple of these, take off the old round nut, put the square nut on, it fits inside that square tube perfectly. Then as you go underneath, there's like a hex bolt inside the caster. As you tighten it, it compresses that rubber, expands it out, and kind of creates a friction grip inside the leg and keeps it from falling out. And a lot of people have a hard time tightening it because the rubber ends up spinning in it. But with the square nut, it kind of acts like a lock nut on top and pulls down rather than just spinning freely. And that's a lot of what I end up doing with the muster instruments is just replacing that little nut on top of the expandable caster with that square nut. Locks it in place, helps it hold it together a lot nicer. But then that's what most of the mallet instruments have that. We get to like timpani and chimes, they have what they call a grip ring caster, stem caster. And, for all the people that have to turn their timpani sideways to get through the door, you pull off the caster, you see this little grip ring and stuff. Those are also readily available throughout all these different caster companies. You have to make sure you measure it correctly, the height, the diameter. Most of the time, the diameter is 7/16. The height, I think, is 1 7/16. I'll have to double check that, but I think that's standard height, has a grip ring on it. Most of the time, if those are falling off, it's just a matter of that grip ring has been compressed one too many times. It doesn't have enough pressure to hold it in place. If you're in a rush to get it fixed, you can kind of get in there with some pliers and kind of open that ring back up a little bit to get some more friction. But they are readily available. Like the Apollo casters I go through, I think they're like $6 a piece. So super cheap, and there's all these different options as well. If you want to get bigger casters and stuff, you just have to be careful. Again, it just depends on the instrument you're working with, and if you have questions, just talk to, call Steve Wise or call one percussion repair person and just ask them, hey, I want to replace these casters. Where can I find something? Or you look on the page. I'm sure one of us has posted something at this point, but
yeah, you guys are my go-to. If I now when I see a repair question, I usually just tag you guys and let you handle it. So
Tracy's so fast at getting back to it, I can never get to it.
Yeah, boom, he's on it. Well, what about I think other things. A lot of the other questions I think are it's hard to sit and address each one, right? So I love that you guys. Just your level of expertise on all of these with each drum and each model specifically is that's a lot to wrap your head around, because in my career I think I've had Yamaha or Ludwig timpani most of the time. I think I've only really played or practiced on Adams timpani maybe a little bit in grad school. So I love how well versed you gentlemen are on all of those. That's super helpful. And things too, like a lot of questions we get are a lot of times band directors just not knowing like the tuning schemes on certain instruments. Rich, I know that you do a lot of we called you to come in for region, right? So if you're tuning a snare drum, a concert snare drum, and I realize that, you ask a bunch of drummers like what their tuning scheme is, and you'll have as many opinions as there are colors white at Home Depot. But generally speaking, what's your tuning scheme on a concert snare drum and maybe like concert tom? So like give us the most general sort of get up on
this.
On that.
This is one of those questions that I hate to answer because I know there's so many people that have so many different opinions. So just take everything I say here with a grain of salt. And if you have your way that you like to tune, it's probably perfect.
So let's just say that the target audience of this is
in general,
band director.
In general, you're in your band room, you probably have a 14-inch snare drum. And what that means is from one rim to the other rim is 14 inches. And then you have a depth on that snare drum. And normally it's around 5 inches, or maybe you got a 6.5-inch drum. If you've got a 14-inch head that's in that 5 inch range, generally speaking, I like to tune an A on the top head and an E on the bottom head. And I did post a video of this on the Percussion Solutions page. To find those pitches on the top head, you play in the center of the head, and that'll give you the fundamental pitch there. And I actually have a snare drum right here. So you turn your snares off, or my throw switches. Here we go. So you're going to play in the center of the head. And that'll give you your fundamental pitch. And then for the bottom head, again, your snares are off, but you're going to mute the top head with one hand and then play like a rim shot on the bottom with your other hand.
Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't turn on the sound for musicians, so we didn't really hear that. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, that's okay.
But yeah, and be clear about which A you're talking about and which E you're talking about.
So, exact range.
So
number wise?
No, I'm saying are A and then the higher E? Yeah.
Oh yes, yeah, A and then the E above that, yeah.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, the fifth works out because of your harmonic series. It helps it resonate longer. The waves line up. You can also do a fourth above as well. That's perfectly fine too. All of this is going to be personal preference, but these are just kind of general guidelines. If you have the same drum and that A sounds a little too tight, you're more than welcome to take it down to an A flat. Some drums sound good at a G. It all depends on that material of wood that it's made out of, and if in the depth of the drum. I just did a set where I did a 6.5-inch drum where I actually ended up tuning closer to a G on that, and I did a G and D on the bottom head, and then their 5-inch drum I did an A and actually did an A and a D because it sounded better than the A and an E. And then I did a 13-inch piccolo, which was around B flat and F, which is where I ended up on those. So in general, if you have a 14-inch drum, A is about the top that you want to go for your top head. And then you can kind of work your way down. And you really want to try to get a good feel on the head. It's like playing a tom on a drum set. If it feels good to play on, you can adjust the way the drum sounds significantly by that bottom head. So you're really aiming for a good feel on the top head and then a little bit more adjustment on the bottom head. But in general, 4/5 apart.
So, okay, so two-headed concert tom or two-headed drum set tom, what's the interval between the top and bottom? Are you clearing it?
Yeah, so again, I go for feel on the top, and then I generally tend to match the bottom.
Yeah.
But if you tune the bottom head a little bit higher, you'll actually hear the pitch of the drum raise. So it'll go boom, kind of up. And then if you tune the drum lower, if the bottom head lower, it'll drop in pitch. And there are different styles of drum set playing. They've been tuned different ways. And that's a whole other discussion.
Yeah, it's a can of worms. And again, we could talk about this for ages and debate it.
One other thing about the concert toms. Okay. One of the main things I see when I go into schools is they've got those concert toms tuned way too low.
Correct.
And you have to remember that you're competing with the sound of the band. And if you're tuned really low, it's going to get lost within the soundscape of that. So you actually end up tuning them up a little bit higher. Exact pitch wise, off the top of my head, I don't remember. Yeah. But you don't want to get it too tight where the drum doesn't ring. But you also don't want it to be like that tubby sound that we hear. You'll know what.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that, because doing marching percussion all over the country, that's what we find, particularly in bass drums, quads, that it's actually too low. and the heads actually get more damaged when the head is too low.
Right, because it flexes more.
Yeah, because it flexes more and it dimples the drum heads. And people, I think a lot of band directors are timid about like, oh, I don't want the head to break, so I don't want to tighten it too much. When the reality is that's actually the problem. Is that if you actually raise the pitch, marching bass drums are always too low and rumbly, and then they wonder why they always get the comment like, well, oh, the bass drums are too loud, can't hear the band. And I found, and I know that in the marching percussion world, we actually tune our concert bass drums much higher than I think people would normally expect. That up close, and certainly when you're right on top of it, it seems like, wow, that's really high. But then when you go stand 100 yards away, do you have a general like tuning scheme that a band director might be able to clue in on a concert bass drum?
Sure. Now, on a concert bass drum, what the general rules that I've heard and I tend to go by are get your batter head, your playing side head, basically as low as you can possibly go and still get a good sound quality, and then match the other side because that's going to give you the resonance on that. I've been using a drum dial on, if you don't know what a drum dial is, I've got one right here. Give me 1 second. So a drum dial actually measures the pressure on the head. So as you sit it down, let's see if I can get a good shot of this. As you set it down, it'll tell you what your pressure is. And so generally at each lug, I try to go somewhere between 73 to 78, depending on the size of the drum. And that generally gets me in a good range. And then again, depending on how the drum is sounding, I'll either take it up or take it down. And the hardest part is matching the sound at each of those tension rods, because there's normally like 12 tension rods and it's such a low pitch. But for that, I've noticed if you use like a good general bass drum mallet and give it a light tap and let it resonate, you can hear that pitch a lot better rather than trying to do it with like a yarn mallet.
Yeah. And just for band directors, that's called clearing a head, like learning how to clear a drum head, which is its own skill. And honestly, you should be doing that on every drum. Marching percussion, we're playing quads, especially when I march Blue Devils, and you've got a big quad line, and tuning every single drum, like getting one set of drums in tune and then trying to match all the other sets of drums to it, and clearing that was like an entire, like it took.
When you're starting with that, take your time.
Yeah.
Realize it's going to be a long haul process on that. I didn't get really good at tuning timpani from the very beginning. I was actually pretty bad at it when I first started. But the more you play, and I've also noticed that when you go to do that, if you've got some kind of reference pitch around it, what really helped me with timpani was I was playing timpani in several groups, and I knew what key the piece was in. So I went and tried to tune to that key, and that's what really made me realize that if I have like a reference pitch to pitch to, and then just take your time and realize you're going to make lots of mistakes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So clearing, and I think when I was a kid, clearing a head, my mistake was I was just always, in my thought, the drum key only went one way, clockwise. Like, oh, just go tighter. Oh, well, this lug is low, I'll go higher. Well, this lug is low, I'll go higher. And then pretty soon the drum was like in the stratosphere, and I had to start all over again because, I wasn't being meticulous about, look, this is the pitch I'm going for, and this one needs to come down and this one needs to come up. But the act of clearing a drum head is just getting each lug or each tension rod to be the same and to have the same pitch on those, and then, helping to achieve a clear fundamental. So that's a skill set. And I think that's something too that, students and directors can get better at over time. I think it's just like intonation on any wind instrument.
Everybody can get better at that.
Yeah. There's like a clarinet. You get a beginning clarinet, class, and they don't know if they're sharp or flat. So you just tell them to make a change. And if it sounds worse, then that's the wrong way.
And if you've been working on a drum for 5 or 10 minutes and you're just getting aggravated, just walk away.
Yeah. Come
back an hour later. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, that all great stuff. Okay, so we've got about 15 minutes left or so. So let's talk about something that maybe, hopefully, will put us all out of work, which would be preventative measures. the things that we see, like the red flags, like the things that we see all the time that could, again, we're talking about things that could easily have been avoided. Like what are some of those red flags that you see, or what are some of those damage points on instruments where you go like, yeah, I know what happened to this instrument. You know what I mean? So what are you seeing, Tracy? Do you see anything in general that like happens all the time?
Yeah. So like I said at the beginning, like restringing mount instruments, don't, if you have a cord that like is frayed or breaks and you're replacing it, don't just replace it. Like take a second to figure out, okay, what caused this cord to break? And most of the time, it's usually there's like a sharp edge on the inside of the bar hole, or the post has a little sharp edge that's kind of digging into the cord. Sometimes the bar is backwards. The hole alignment, like the one hole is usually like, I think 1.5 degrees, and the other one ends up being like, I think 15, 12 degrees or something. But if it's backwards, that alignment can really cause the string to pull at weird angles, put pressure on it, and cause it to wear. So when you restring, before you take out the cord, either get like a masking tape or something and mark the points where it broke. Take the string out, take a look, see what caused the issue. If it's the bar backward, flip it around. Don't trust the stamp position, because it's on like Adams, the natural row, the stamp is on the front, but on the accidental, the stamp is on the back. Ludwig, I think they're both on the front. Yamaha, I think they're both front and back. So take a look at the holes and like eyeball the angle and make sure that it's actually lined up the right way. And then if it's like a sharp corner on the hole or the post is cutting into it, you can buy a little file set, or just a little tiny round files, like 3/16 or whatever, and just go in and kind of file down any sharp edges around where the cord broke, and then go about restringing it, and your cord will last a lot longer, because whatever caused it to go in the first place is now taken care of, and it's not going to just happen again. I had one high school, they replaced the cord, and it like broke, they replaced it, and it lasted 3 weeks before it broke again. And that's when they called me, and I was like, showed them, this is what the issue is, filed it down, haven't had an issue since.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the stuff that it's crazy sometimes what we see in schools while we are there, while the repair person is there, what they end up doing. But one of the biggest things I see is just people just ramming instruments into door jams, like trying to get them through the door. Like, you got to realize that caster is only about that. What's holding that on there is only about that big around, and that bends pretty easily. And it causes a lot of structural damage, especially if it's not a marching frame kind of thing. We see this a lot on chimes. We see it on timpani a ton. Other things you can make sure they're doing, make sure they're not like beating on a drum, moving a drum correctly, picking it up by the snare drum cradle rather than hanging onto it from the rim. Timpani, not moving it from the rim itself, grab the struts on the side and push those. And one other thing is with your snare drums that I don't think a lot of people know this, because I actually didn't know this, is you're actually supposed to keep your snares on when it is in storage, because that keeps the snares tight. And if you keep them off, it relaxes them and just lets them sag. So your snares are actually going to wear out faster than if you just keep them taut. So those are kind of some general things.
The reason I cringe is that my pet peeve on the marimba is kids always push the marimba from the back, right? So the narrow end goes through the door. And then they push it about 70 or 80% of the way through the door. And then as it gets wider, they bang one of the keys on the door frame, and then that bends the post that holds the string. And then those eventually, now I usually tap them back gently with a chime hammer. But after it's bent so many times, eventually it snaps, and then that piece of metal is in the frame. And then drilling that out and getting that out is a huge pain in the butt. and then having to replace it and do those sorts of things. And again, that's another case of, I've seen like the support beams on marimbas. I've actually seen a band parent shove something into it and it snapped. Now, I actually fixed it myself because I knew that, as in any instrument, I don't care what company you're from, there's a supply chain issue that you're not going to get that part from Pearl or Yamaha or Musser or whomever for
Our
months.
standard wait time is 3 months, is what I've been telling customers.
Yeah. So if that happens even at the beginning of the marching season, it's not going to be done by the end of the marching season. So,
other thing to mention is if you've got an instrument with a pedal on it, to lift that pedal up as you move it so it doesn't jam into anything as you're moving.
always, vibraphones are not allowed to move until the pedal is up. We learned that in marching band. Plus, obviously we have microphone cables now and all that stuff. So cabling unplugged, pedal goes up, and then you're allowed to move the instrument. You're never allowed to move, whether it be chimes, if the pedal is retracts, or vibraphone or pedal bells, anything with the pedal that comes off. I cannot stress how important it is to have cases and bags and covers and to store things properly.
General rule of thumb is when you buy an instrument, buy the case for it.
Yeah, it's really inexcusable. You wouldn't buy, St. Petersburg tuba without a case. Like you can't. And things like congas, like people throwing them on the bus with no case, and then the bus driver hits the brakes. The conga is sitting on its, it rolls off of the back, the back seat in the bus, lands on the ground and splits the conga down the middle.
That you want to send to a repair person.
Yes, 1,000%.
Those are a pain to clamp up.
Yeah, it is rough. So, I see groups who are going to festival because it's festival season. This is very topical, but not having a trap case to put all of your stands in, and don't just throw your tambourine in the trap case with all of the snare and cymbal hardware, right? That tambourine's $100+ and as soon as it gets dropped, using trap tables instead of music stands, are like, oh, I'll throw a towel on a music stand. Well, of course, you go to a festival and you end up getting the only stands that are left, because they use all the nice stands for the winds. All the stands that are left are the ones that are rickety, and then a kid goes to put a cabasa on it, and then it slams onto the ground. And how fragile those instruments are. Like, if you have a nice set of maracas and you drop it on the ground, they crack. Tambourines, those sorts of things. Like just using a nice trap table, even making your own with a restaurant tray and a piece of plywood with some felt on it or something like that. Using trap tables. Again, we said Wingnut Wednesday like 4 times on so far already. Moving equipment, I think, is huge if you have to move it.
If you've got, especially if you're using timpani for marching band, I've seen a lot of drums that have fallen off of a truck, which does significant damage to the thing.
I've seen one fall off of the trailer moving onto the field. At prelims at Grand Nationals in 2005.
Rough. This is a quick story. I was at a local school that when I was teaching, it was our rival school, but we were good friends. And we were touring out their like trailer, and they had a dual layer trailer, and they put the vibraphones up top. And I kid you not, on one of the trips, I guess somebody didn't put the ratchet strap hard enough, and it fell off of the top rack. But it got saved by an LP tray stand that was clamped to it. So the whole vibraphone was hanging on a support post with this. I said, you could have sent that to LP to show how strong this thing is.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, speaking from experience, we had a band dad who was in a hurry to get the Timps off of the trailer and came down, and it snapped the strut on the 23, and there was a massive timpani solo in the middle of the marching band show. So
I think this is a good point with any kind of loading that you have. If it's something that you're going to be doing consistently, getting a schedule up of what gets on the truck at a specific time and having specific individuals do that loading every single time, whether it's be like, these 4 students do the entire setup, or these students bring instruments to it, these students put it on, or
diagram everything,
puts it on. So everybody has the same job every single time, so they can get better and faster at it.
Yeah, diagram it, put it, like we actually diagram it, we put it in a sheet protector, we tape it with tape, like packing tape to the truck so that it gets loaded the exact same way every single time.
And you can even have a list of what gets loaded in what order. And it makes it super simple if you have somebody who's sick and then.
Yeah. Take a picture of it with your phone, have all the kids, make sure that they all have it, break down hi-hat stands correctly, all of the travel things. I would say, I agree with you that a lot of the damage happens when things are in transit. And that's also when things rattle loose, right? Especially if you're going a long way, whether it be a football game or a contest, like just the amount of shaking that's going on, that's when all those wing nuts get loose. And so taking everything off the truck, tightening everything.
And you have to remember that what we do is we hit an instrument every single time, multiple times, sometimes thousands of times in a concert. And each of those is a vibration throughout the entire instrument. It's not just the head that's moving. That entire instrument is vibrating. So anything that can come loose will come loose over time.
Yeah.
Wingnut Wednesday.
Yeah.
is perfect.
Yeah. So, or Titan Tuesday, depends on when your marching band rehearses. But yeah, and I guess there's a lot. I mean, there's plenty of things but I think that having a plan, both with understanding the basics concepts on all these instruments, understanding how a snare drum throw off works, and the basics of clearing a drum head, how the timpani. Really, if people just can keep those those timpani heads in the right range to start, is going to solve maybe 80% of the problems that we encounter out there. And then really just being very, very mindful about any time that you're transporting instruments. A pet peeve, it's maybe not necessarily related to repair, but related to investment. When, the same thing with cases is when you have hardware, don't let the kids Frankenstand the hardware, meaning a pearl bass with a Yamaha top and then a Ludwig, like wing nut on top. Like I make them go through about once every 9 weeks. We actually take out every stand we own, put it on the floor, and make sure that it's all matched up, and then we put it back together. Because a lot of times during marching band, we steal the tops of stands to clamp on marimbas and that sort of thing. So at the end of the season, we take everything out, we lay it on the floor, we make sure everything's matched up. If we do have something that's damaged beyond repair, we strip it completely, like every rubber foot, every felt, every wing nut that we can salvage from a stand that's maybe going to go in the dumpster. But we strip it of everything, and then we put it in our, our little parts, toolbox, and then
as you're taking them apart for the marching season, what we used to do was we took a colored tape. So like your Yamahas would be orange. And so you do the bottom part, and then the part that you took off the top, you'd wrap that in orange too. And then the pearl ones would be blue. And so when you go to put them back at the end of the season, because who remembers 3 months later what came from where and what looks like what, sometimes you can match the wing nuts up to help you there. But, if you got tape, anybody can put that together.
Yeah. I think maybe the last thing about, damage control and just prevention is making sure that you understand the basics of, proper implement selection, like, which mallets to use on each instrument, making sure that we're using the right stuff. That in and of itself, choosing implements should be an entire episode. But if you're not sure, when in doubt, just ask. Like, hey, we need this to be brighter, but are these mallets too hard for a xylophone? Or, what mallets, can we use for each instrument, and kind of making yourself aware of that. So,
sorry, one last thing.
No, yeah, go ahead.
In the lines of instruments with wooden bars, a lot of the wood that comes out nowadays is what they call fast growth wood. So they've cut down the old growth, and they've used a good amount of the old growth wood, which was a lot more durable. The fast growth wood isn't quite as hard as the old growth stuff. So using a harder mallet on those wooden type of bars actually ends up denting them pretty easily. I've seen new xylophones come out, and then 2 months later they're all full of dimples from just too hard a mallet and too hard of a stroke on that.
Well, we're going to run out of time here, so I'll wrap it up really quick. But I thank you, gentlemen, for being here, and we will definitely do some more of these, and maybe we'll get into the weeds a little bit more. But I just want to thank you all for for being here before we run out of time on our Zoom call. But hey,
Yeah, absolutely. This was a lot of fun.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much, Tracy.
Yeah.
Appreciate you. Thanks, Rich. So we'll talk again soon. Thanks.